Thanks, Steve. Stephen, my name is Lyle. I'm an alcoholic. Uh, I kind of, pardon me, have to issue a disclaimer right away. We no sooner got home yesterday afternoon, and I started feeling bad for some reason. I don't think I've got COVID, but it's some kind of a bug, and I've spent much of today in bed, and that's where I'm going to be when I finish this. So, I really kind of short sheeting you tonight. You're not getting the 100% version of who I normally am as a result of that. But I keep remembering that I'm just up here to tell a story. I'm not up here to give a performance. And I know the story pretty well since I lived it. So I'll try to step up and go the extra mile and get this done. And hopefully there's a message in it by the time I get done. But I am operating kind of at a disadvantage here from a how I feel standpoint. But nonetheless, and when these things happen, I very seldom ever. It's rare when I am not feeling really good. I've got a few years on me age-wise, but it's rare when I'm not hitting at 100%. And so when something like this comes along, one of the thoughts that I still get after 32 and a half years is, my gosh, I don't know how I would handle this right now if I had a hangover on top of it. It would just not be a very good deal at all. So I'm grateful that all I got to do is just take a few pills and aspirin and stuff and get to feeling better. I don't have this pounding head and wondering what I did just prior to getting here. My sobriety date is March the 7th of 1990. And I find it really hard to believe that I've got that much sobriety. When I see these numbers like 32, that sounds like a long time to me. And when I see it on somebody else's name, it sounds like and feels like a long time. When I see it attached to my name, it doesn't feel that way. I still feel like I'm somewhere in the first 4, 5, 10 years of sobriety. I just cannot hook up the time element to it and get them to coincide. Nonetheless, I'm grateful, and I was going to say it's beyond me how I managed to stay sober. It's not really. It's AA and the higher power and all of the people in this program and this fellowship that I got in here with. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I first came to AA. I've just kind of recently started doing that because while AA is pretty much the backbone and the center part of my life today, it's not all of it. I mean, I live 360 degrees in this world, which is what I think AA and sobriety is supposed to equip me for. But I first had an encounter with AA in 1975 when I was living in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And I was a young pilot for Northwest Airlines. I got a DWI. Back in 75, a DWI wasn't the end of the world. They certainly weren't fun, but I had plenty of friends who'd had them, and I knew the drill. I knew that I was supposed to get an attorney, and he would go to court with me, and he would talk to the judge, and I would pay a $300 fine, and then I'd walk out with a careless driving charge. And that was the drill. That was the routine. It was done routinely that way, consistently. So I went into court that morning expecting that, and it didn't quite work out that way. This judge, who was probably a member of AA, told me and my attorney, he said, well, that can happen, but only after you spend a year in AA. And I got to tell you, I was absolutely furious about that. Excuse me. I thought it was I didn't see any connection between AA and this DWI. I mean, after all, a DWI was just bad luck, could happen to anybody, and that was my mantra. And the idea that I was going to have to go to AA for a year just absolutely infuriated me. And initially, I told my attorney not only no, but hell no. And then I said, and at that point in time, the FAA was not cross-checking driver's licenses and DWIs with pilot licenses, so I didn't have that to contend with or worry with it. I gave it a little thought, and finally I said, okay, I'll do it. And I was still just seething. So I went to an AA meeting. I went to one just to see what it was, and I was there about 5 minutes, and I had this thing all figured out. I looked around, I observed what was going on around me. I listened to the people that were talking, and within 5 minutes, I knew that this whole program was nothing but an absolute cult. It was a deeply embedded cult, and these people that were talking, doing all this talking, were nothing but a bunch of born-again, non-drinking, fanatic cult members. And I came home and so advised my wife. And so I didn't have to have anybody sign for me on these meetings. I just had to turn in a list of meetings I was attending. So everywhere I flew around the country, I would walk into the hotel room before I even get my uniform off. I would go get the phone book, and I'd write down the local name, address and phone number of the AA. I didn't care if it was in Seattle or Portland or Chicago or Tampa. I didn't care where it was. That was my first routine every night when I got into town on a layover. And I'm turning in stacks and lists of these fictitious meetings, none of which I'm attending. And happy to do it that way. And about once a month, I tell Barbara, I guess I better go to one of these meetings. So in case somebody sometime, somewhere, somehow has to say they saw me there, that can happen. So I would go to one of those meetings. I would rather have a fingernail pulled out than go to an AA meeting. It's the longest hour of my entire life. And I had a really bad attitude. I didn't like AA. I didn't like anybody in it. And it really showed. And something would be said and I'd comment or respond to it. And then immediately I'd have the whole AA group turning my way, directing comments my way, because I had such a crappy attitude and was actually destroying the meeting. And then I'd want to fight. And I knew that if I did that, that was going to get back to the judge and there were going to be consequences. So I learned to just sit in there and absorb this stuff. And it was just inane. And I'd come home from one of those meetings with smoke coming out of my ears. And I'd walk in and I'd tell Barbara, that is the most effed up bunch of people I have ever seen in my entire life. I said, my God Almighty. I said, they lose their homes, their cars, their jobs, their wives, their kids. And I said, they can't figure this out. And they sit around and they talk about this for the entire hour. And I'd say, for God's sake, I said, let's have a drink. And I'd mix a couple of really, really stiff ones just so I could kind of chill out and settle down, calm down from this AA meeting that I was attending. So that was not an attempt to get sober. I had absolutely zero intention of getting sober. All I wanted to do is get a year behind me, and that finally happened. And for the next 15 years, my life went along okay. And when I say okay, it was full of alcohol-related incidents, but I always managed to dodge the bullet. And it got to the point where I just assumed that was going to be the case. I had a lot of near misses. I had a few foxhole prayers. And but I was not having consequences. I had several car accidents. They were single car accidents and nobody was hurt. And I managed to get out of there before the cops showed up. I got in fights. I woke up in places I didn't know where I was or how I got there. I lost cars a couple of times. I had no idea where they were. So I had the entire plethora of alcoholic experiences, except I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of it. And I didn't believe it until 15 years later on March the 8th. March the 7th was the day I had my last drink of alcohol. March the 8th, an incident took place that had never occurred before. Excuse me. Pardon me. At least not publicly. And that was that a flight crew was arrested for having flown a Boeing 727 with 58 passengers from Fargo, North Dakota to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. I was the captain of that flight crew. Now, I'm aware that most of the time that I hear AA speakers, they come and they go, and I don't know what they did for a living. And that's as it should be, because we're up here to tell a recovery story. So we're not up here to impress with professional status or college degrees or anything else like that. We're just up here to tell a story. But the airline pilot part is such a part of the story that it was the part that precipitated all of the publicity. It also set me up for a federal felony and a term in the federal prison system. Had it not been for that, none of that would have happened. If I'd been a doctor, a lawyer, a construction worker, office worker, anything else, none of the fallout would have occurred that did take place. By way of mention, I'm the first airline pilot ever in the history of American commercial aviation history to be arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced, and sent to federal prison for flying a commercial airliner under the influence of alcohol. And that happened as a result of my incident. So I look at this and I go, unlike many alcoholics who get bled to death along the way, a long pathway, they lose this, they lose that, the family goes, they have bits and pieces that are disastrous in their life, but they survive them and go on to the next calamity. I didn't have, excuse me, I didn't have that. When my bottom came, it came in one fell swoop. I mean, it blew me all to pieces. It completely, totally destroyed me. Everything was gone in one fell swoop. And as I look back on it, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that because I don't think I would have been able to get sober without that. People have said, man, it's too bad all that had to happen. And I say, yeah, it is in a way, except for the fact that if it hadn't happened in exactly the way that it did happen, I don't believe I would be sober today. I have two parents who died from this disease of alcoholism. Both of them succumbed to this disease. I have two suicides in my family, one from alcohol, one from drugs. And I certainly would have followed that path if I'd had an opportunity to do that. So the hit that I took and the depth and severity of it was exactly what this higher power that I refer to as God saw fit to give me in order that I might survive and be able to sit here with you folks tonight. And I'm very, very clear about that. I spent 12 hours that day. It was a surreal experience. I've lived a lifetime of achievement and a success and accomplishment, and I've had a good life up to this point. I've had a good life up to this point. Everything that I had ever tried to do was done to the best of my ability. I just mentioned that I have two parents who died from alcoholism, which is true. But I never give one of these talks without thanking those parents, those two parents, for the good stuff they gave me before the alcohol killed them. And before that happened, they imbued my sister and me with some really good qualities that I still have today that still stand me in good stead. My sister's 2 years younger than I am. One of those is a hard work ethic, and I saw that they demonstrated that by their personal example, until, of course, they no longer could. So I'm indebted to my parents. I know a lot about this disease. I know about the genetics. I know a lot about it from a medical and scientific standpoint. But I'm not an alcoholic simply because my parents were. I'm an alcoholic because I didn't know, and I wouldn't have believed it if I'd been told. But I chose to drink. I chose to drink, never, ever, ever, ever thinking I would become an alcoholic. As a matter of fact, swearing that I would never be like the alcoholics I'd seen, and I wasn't. To a large degree, I was not. I didn't drink like they did. I didn't behave like they did. I didn't do the things they did. And I thought that would make me different. I thought that would exclude me from the category of alcoholism. I really believe that. I saw alcohol in my native community. I saw it when I flew around the United States, drunks in the alleyways and the doorways, passed out on the grass, dirty and drinking out of brown paper bags. Life's losers, and I was not one of those. And I thought, those are alcoholics. Those are very clearly alcoholics. There's no way I can be or ever will be an alcoholic. And I was absolutely convinced of that. However, on the day of this arrest, it was a surreal experience. This was an event that absolutely could not possibly be happening to me. This was not how I had lived my life. This was not the way it was supposed to end. And this was impossible for me to believe it was actually being terminated in this way. And then I'd have those back in body experiences where I'm looking around and I'm thinking, oh my God, it is. It's happening. It's happening right now. It's happening to me. And it was all I could do to not get sick and throw up at the reality of what I was watching. I think if there was anything really good about this, and there were things that were good about it, but at that moment, is that I was broken. I was completely broken. I was beaten. I had no more will to fight, resist, try to outmaneuver this disease. I was completely, absolutely done. This retreat that we just came back from in Pennsylvania, I've never been at a place where so many people came up and asked me about that movie Flight. I've been asked about it before, but there must have been at least 24 people that came up and said, oh, you're the guy in the movie. I go, no, not, Denzel and I have a real strong resemblance to each other, I know, but that was not my story. And I never got any contact about it. I don't know whether my story was a catalyst for that movie or not, but I never talked to anybody about it. But unlike him, who wanted to continue on with the cocaine, the drugs, and all the other stuff, I was completely done. At this moment in time, I was through, completely through. Just as a sideline, I've never done any drugs. I don't think that's a big deal. I've just never done any drugs. I never even smoked cigarettes. And I just told this group, I've said it before. I said, I could never understand why somebody would stand around with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in one hand when they could actually have a drink in both hands. So I didn't smoke. And I had a lot of reasons for believing that none of this could ever possibly have happened to me, and yet it did. I was released later that day. We had gone to 2 different facilities and given blood. Over the course of those 12 hours, I had a million thoughts. And one of them was simply this: that Northwest Airlines at that point in time was the only major carrier that did not have a program for alcoholic pilots. All the other major carriers had a program called the HIMSS program, HIMS. I'm not going to go into that. There's a good story behind it, but Northwest had refused to join the rest of the industry. And so periodically a pilot would get in trouble with alcohol on a layover. If it got back to the company, we all saw what happened. It was swift, it was severe, it was irreversible. And those stories just burst among the pilots and flight attendants like wildfire. And within a day or 2 or 3, we all had the story that just ripped through our ranks. And I knew that that's where my name was going to go. And that was a debilitating, devastating thought, that this is the way I will be remembered. This is the way I will be remembered. That's my legacy here at Northwest. And I got to tell you, the shame was so severe, and made more so within a few days when the late night comics and all the tabloids picked up on this thing. And I was reading and hearing about some of the stuff on there. That was just all, none of it was true. It made for good print and good copy and good reading, good entertainment, but it was not true. But yet I knew that the entire world out there believed it was. And this was the way, this is what I had brought down on myself. I had been the guy in my family, I had 3 grown children. And throughout the course of their entire lifetime in my family, I had been the standard bearer for things like duty, honor, country, character, honesty, integrity, do the right thing. That had been my mantra. And I had just set a personal example that destroyed all of that. The example I had set by virtue of my choices, behavior, and actions completely negated everything I had ever told my kids. And that was a knife in my heart. That absolutely did me in. Somewhere in the first week of treatment, I had lost the will to live. I don't talk about this normally. I've got so much to get into this time period of suicide. I wasn't thinking about it, romancing the idea. I was an eyelash away from executing it. And somewhere in there, it's an often heard, old, tired, worn out phrase when we talk about that God-given moment of clarity. I had one of those. And I recognize that if I kill myself in a treatment center, it will be the only thing that's worse than what has already occurred. And then my family will not be able to survive the scarring and the stigma of that ultimate final action. And so slowly, very slowly, like turning a battleship around in the ocean, I began to think about living more than I thought about dying. AA, my fellow patients, the 12 steps, this was an AA treatment center that I was in. I'm hearing things that I'm remembering from 15 years earlier. I find that amazing because there's absolutely nothing I heard 15 years earlier that I thought was worth remembering. I certainly made no attempt to do it. And I'm hearing that and I'm thinking, I heard that before. Somebody said that once before. And I'm hearing that. But this time, my mouth is shut. My mouth is shut and my ears are open and I'm listening. And I'm laying there at night playing back a lot of this. And I know it's true. I know it's true. I got home the day after the arrest. The arrest was on March the 8th of 1990. I got home the next day on March the 9th. I saw 2 doctors. One doctor sent me to another doctor who was a very prominent psychiatrist in the Atlanta area, was also certified in addiction medicine, which I'd never heard of. I did not know such a thing existed. And they had set the appointment up for 6 o'clock on Friday night. March the 9th, when I got home, was Friday. And even in the condition I was in, I knew that doctors don't see patients at 6 o'clock on Friday night. So I picked up on the fact that there was a certain sense of urgency attached to this. That doctor, some years later, told me, he said, based on your appearance, he said, I was so afraid you were a suicide and it was imperative to get you over to see this man just as quickly as possible. So we went over and we saw this man. I have no recollection of that meeting. I hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 2 days, but that entire event is very much like a blackout. I'm a blackout drinker. When I drink, I black out. Not so much early on, but later on I did. And then I'd have spotty blackouts where I remember bits and pieces, but not the entire bit of it. And I don't remember anything he asked me. I just know that I was so defeated that I gave him a straight answer every time he asked me a question. At some point he looked at me and said, Lyle, he said, you're an alcoholic. And I clearly remember having no internal reaction to that. And that was important for the reasons I've already mentioned, that I have grown up hating alcoholics and alcoholism my entire life. And yet in a way that I'll never understand, in the 24 hours since the arrest, way down deep inside, I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I had become that one thing I had sworn I would never be. And I said to him, I said, I thought you'd probably tell me that. I said, I'm okay with that. But I said, I just got home today. I said, please let me go home. I said, I'd like for Barbara to just hang on to me. Let my mind uncoil. Let me absorb what's happened to me, and then I'll go into treatment. He said, you need to go into treatment tonight. And I looked at him and paused, and I said, okay. So we turned around, drove back from his office, to the treatment center across Atlanta. And I went in with the clothes on my back. The last turn before the treatment center, there was a sign there. The headlight swept the sign. I hit the brakes with the lights on, directly on the sign. And it's like anything, it's like what we do in AA. When we do a written fifth step, where we write things down, we see the words, and the words are not just floating through our mind. The words are there, and the reality attaches to theirs. And so I saw the words on the sign. It said Anchor Hospital, a hospital for alcoholism and other chemical dependencies. And all I thought at that moment was, my God, what's happened in my life? It ends tonight. My life ends tonight in a treatment center for alcoholics. And I thought, what happened? What possibly could have happened? And I had a little mini flashback over the course of my life, most of which I was extraordinarily proud of. And it was like they had all vanished. All these markers along the way just vanished. And I remember sitting there hollow. I had zero self-esteem. I had no value as a human being. And we started down the hill into the treatment center. I read a summarizing paragraph at the end of a long medical report when I was in treatment. And said, given the history and background of this man, it's unlikely to believe he would ever be a productive member of society. I didn't share that view. I didn't, as a matter of fact, it stunned me a little bit. But I thought, well, I mean, heck, I'm the one that gave them all the information. That's what they deduced from the information I gave them. So we started down the hill into the treatment center. For the first time that day, it was dark, of course. I thought to myself, this is March the 9th. I thought, my God, this is our 27th wedding anniversary. I was going to hear two comments that day on Friday, March the 9th, that I could not fathom. The first one took place in the doctor's office when I told him what had happened, and he started around the desk and he said, he had exclaimed, he said, this is horrible. He said, this is absolutely horrible. Then he stopped and looked at me. He said, but maybe this is what had to happen. I could not understand why he would say that to me. What possible connection could that have with anything that he and I had dealt with up to that point in time? And I'll get into that here in a little bit. So I couldn't respond. The second comment I heard was that night when I said to Barbara, for the first time, as I thought it was my wedding anniversary, I said, we're about 200-300 yards from the treatment center. And I said, hell of a way to spend an anniversary, huh? And she said very softly, it might be the best one we ever had. I couldn't fathom how anyone could manufacture a thought like that. I knew at that moment in time that there was no hope I would ever fly again. There was no hope that I would ever come back from this again. I was done. The bottom was so deep and so serious and so devastating. I knew nobody could come back from this. No Northwest pilot ever had. And their situations weren't even 10% as bad as mine was and was going to get. So I had no hope whatsoever. And she said that. And I was glad she wasn't crying hysterically. But I knew it was over. I knew it was over. And we headed on down into the treatment center. I like to stop and tell you that some years back, March the 9th rolled around. It was a beautiful, gorgeous Georgia morning. And one of my sponsees pulled up to the house. We got 7 acres out here. I was surprised to see him. I said, what are you doing out here? And he said, well, I've heard the story. It's March the 9th. I wanted to come by and wish you and Barbara a happy anniversary. We went inside and coffee was on. And he said, what's the secret for having stayed married so long? And before I had a chance to respond, Barbara said, I think it's due mostly to the fact that I could just never stand to admit that I'd made a mistake. So I've come to appreciate certain character defects. They may not be good for us alcoholics, but they're certainly good for the woman I'm married with. As long as she maintains that, I'll have a place to stay. So I'll tell you, I also want to go back and catch up a little bit and tell you that I was born in Wichita, Kansas, September of 1938. So I'm coming up on the approaching side of 84. I'll save you the math. I sometimes just to be funny, I'll go, well, I'm 83. I still got all my own parts and they all work. which is true. But if Barbara's sitting in the audience, as she was on this last weekend, I'll say then they all work, and I have to look at her and go, well, most of the time, right? Most of the time. And she'll nod. So I have to qualify that. But at any rate, I grew up in a World War II housing project on the southeast edge of Wichita. It was a very poor area. And yet my happiest childhood memories, my entire life, center right there in that little World War II housing project called Plainview. We were all the same. We were all equal. We were all normal. We were all the same. And this housing project wasn't very pretty. It was temporary. It was temporary quarters. Only supposed to last through World War II. It's still there. And it was very diverse: blacks, whites, Hispanics, a small Native American segment, and everybody got along. There were no gangs. There were no drugs. There were no drive-by shootings. There were no school incidents. And I don't think I saw a police car on a trouble call more than once or twice my entire time there. So from my standpoint, it was a wonderful place to grow up. It was a wonderful place for me to grow up. When I was 14, the alcohol had finally done its job inside the family. A lot of bad things, really bad things had happened. My parents divorced. Within the next 3 years, each of them had been married and divorced 2 more times. I didn't do well in blended families, and I would bounce from family to family. It's interesting that I would not know any of my stepbrothers or step siblings if they walked into a room today. I remember 1 or 2 names, but I don't think I'd know them if I saw them on the street. I graduated high school when I was 17, and I had decided going into the service, didn't know what. One of my buddies came back to the Marine Corps, and I was impressed very, very much. He had changed a lot, and he was sharp looking and snappy, and had just gotten out of Marine Corps boot camp. And he and I sat and drank beer for about 3 or 4 hours. And he related these boot camp experiences to me, and most of which were cruel, sadistic stories of what Marine drill instructors do to their recruits. So I had just turned 18, and I decided that I just couldn't wait to go do that. And within a few days, I'd signed on the line, and off I went. I hear a lot of stories from us alcoholics that they never felt like they never fit in, and you won't hear that from me. It's true for them. It's not true for me. Once I got over the culture shock of going from a barely 18-year-old kid into this extreme, deeply demanding military environment, once I got past that a little bit, I really settled into it. I liked it. It was intense. It was extreme. It was competitive. It was demanding. And I found that one thing that I had never, ever experienced before in my life, that Marine Corps sense of camaraderie that the Marine Corps is famous for. That band of brothers, that inextricable linking of one Marine to another. It is a brotherhood, a deeply felt brotherhood. And that captured me. That absolutely captured me. And I decided that's where I was going to stay. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I wanted to be. Coming up on our last week in boot camp, and the drill instructors called out 3 names of the 3 top guys. My name was the second one called. I had no earthly idea. I was totally, absolutely surprised. All I wanted to do was survive. I just wanted to survive. I had no idea that from a competitive standpoint that I was doing as well as I did. So I got a PFC strike. That's 1 strike. That's private first class. That's not a lot of rank in the Marine Corps. But I'll tell you something, that rank meant a lot to me because it stood out among my friends who were still slick sleeve privates. And I couldn't take my eyes off of that sleeve, of that private, that red bordered stripe on it. And I thought, man, I'm staying here because at the rate I'm moving up, general's just not that far away. So I stayed in and always excelled. One of the things that I don't have time for in this talk is a long drunk-a-log. I've got one and I could spend the entire hour doing it. And I've already mentioned some of it. The thing that got me when I got into treatment was the first simple thing that they told me was when I start to drink, I don't have any control over it. And I saw that. I finally saw that. I didn't think I drank because I needed to. I said I drink because I like to. And so every now and then somebody will say that, and I just kind of grin. I go, yeah, so did I. But when I looked at it, it was that compulsion, that desire to always have one more drink. The football half wasn't quite over, or the band just started, or a group of people just came in that were friends. There was always a reason to have one more drink until either the bottle was empty or the bar closed. There was always that reason. The other thing I remember is that I do not remember ever drinking without getting drunk. And I know that's not an accurate memory, or I'd be dead. But I cannot remember a time when I sat down and had 3 or 4 drinks and got up and left. I cannot remember anything like that. Because once I start to drink, there's always a reason to have one more. And if I like the way I'm feeling now, it's going to be better 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours from now. It never was, but that's what I thought. Excuse me. So, excuse me. Once I got into treatment, I saw the difference. I saw what they were trying to tell me. I got it. But I'm going along this Marine Corps thing. I'm drinking with all my buddies. The other thing that was a problem was I was always in a heavy drinking environment. I was a young Marine. I was supposed to be tough, supposed to be able to play hard, drink hard. I did that. So did my buddies. I was no different from them. Later, I was a fighter pilot. Same thing there. Later, I was an airline pilot. Same thing in that crowd. So I never had any reason to believe that my drinking was any different. And yet, I remember specifically the evening that I saw that my drinking was pulling away from the rest of them. I remember that event clearly. I'm not going to go into it and talk about it, but I remember that night. And 4.5 years later, my commanding officer came to me and he said, "There's a brand new program out called Marine Aviation Cadet. You're the only guy in the unit whose entry score is high enough to go test for that." The entry scores at that time were called a GCT, General Classification Test. I knew my score was high. I'm still not sure how I got there, but I knew it was high. And I said, "I'd like to go test." I'd never really considered flying airplanes. So pilots, I thought, all had to have college degrees, and they certainly didn't come from a World War II housing project. They certainly didn't come out of an alcoholic home, and they certainly didn't come out of the Native American community. I identified very strongly with my Native DNA. I was very active in the powwows. I was a dancer. I was heavy into Native American events all along the way here. I've since gone back to those since getting sober. And I participate in a program we call the Red Road, which embodies AA. But at any rate, I wanted to test and I passed. He said, "There's some things you need to know about this. It's an 18-month process." And he said, "On average, plus or minus, about half don't make it." And he said, "You're coming in the back door. You're taking a test as an enlisted Marine. And the rest of these people, 98, 99% are coming in the civilian side. They've got to have 2 years college minimum just to get into the program. And most of them will have more than that." So I could do the logic on that. I thought, well, I stand a good chance of being in the 50% failure rate because I'm starting off so far behind educationally. But I said, I want to try. So I went home to Wichita. They were having a powwow. They called for an honoring dance for me because I was going to Pensacola the next day. I went out and led the dance. And I was impacted by that for the rest of the 18 months because all I could think, the thought that burned itself in my brain was that there is no way I can go home as a failure or a washout and tell them I didn't make it. Because I'm the only one in this entire community that has this opportunity for a set of gold wings, gold bars, a prestigious career, a glamorous way to live. I'm the only one to whom this opportunity is being offered, and I cannot go back to a failure. So I was driven with that for all 4 phases of flight training. I always graduated. I was always the number 2 guy in my class in my standings, and I don't know how that happened. I was always surprised by that. I never believed it was that my flight grades were as good as they were. I was watching my friends wash out weekly, sometimes daily. Their hearts broken. They never met my eyes as they came to say goodbye and walked away. And they weren't going to fly again. And I knew they wanted this every bit as much as I did, but for whatever reason, they weren't going to be able to do it. And every time one of them walked away, I thought, before this 18 months is up, that will be me. We left, and I'm drinking hard every weekend. Me and my cadet buddies are just raging drunk, chasing girls, raising hell, doing everything we can. Hair on fire, just going 100 miles an hour. But on Sunday, I shut it off. And the big book talks about that because at that point in time, I could do that. I wanted those gold wings more than I wanted to drink on Sunday. So I'm spending my day prepping for the study lessons and getting geared up for the flights that were coming up that week. The final 6 months when we left Florida, I went to Beeville, Texas for advanced jet flight training. I got drunk with all my buddies the night I got in on a Friday night, went to the officers club and got drunk. They said, "Let's go into town. There's a drive-in in here called Cane's. That's where all the good looking girls hang out. And we do pretty well there." So I said, okay. So I went in with them and they went after carload of girls. And I kind of hung back. I'm drinking. I'm not ready to make an approach yet because I need some more booze in me and I'm rehearsing some things to say. I can't see the driver of the car very well. So anyway, I finally reached that point where I thought I could make the approach, and I go up there and I hadn't been talking. I'd just been drinking. And that girl's name was Barbara, the same Barbara that's in the other room tonight. She turned and looked at me. I thought, my gosh, she's pretty. And I wanted to say something about her brown eyes, but it kind of came out sideways and upside down, like, I just took about the brow. I mean, it was so bad, I didn't even understand it. And I was embarrassed. She looked at me like I just peed all over the side of her car, and I just turned around and walked away. I thought, that's it for me. I'm not going back. A little while later, she got out and walked in, and I got a good look at her. She had a cute little butt, turquoise shorts on, shapely legs, and I had an AA thought. Certainly didn't recognize as an AA thought until about another 29 years later when she walked in. I'm thinking to myself, why she got a little ways to walk. And I'm thinking, man, I want what she has. I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it. And I did. I had a chance encounter with her the next day. She told me her name was Barbara. Let me buy her a cup of coffee. On February the 25th of 1963, which was her 20th birthday, she pinned that set of gold wings and gold bars on me. It was over. I had spent 18 pressure-packed, stress-filled months full of fear, and then followed by immediate adrenaline overload after each flight was over, followed by fear and stress for the next flight, followed by an adrenaline overload when it was over. That cycle over and over and over for 18 months, and now I could relax. I had those wings, I had the gold bars, I was a fighter pilot, and I had this good-looking girl. We went home to Wichita on a 3-week leave. As it was coming to, she stayed with my sister. And as she was coming to an end, I called and said, let's go get married. So we drove down to Newkirk, Oklahoma, stood in front of the Justice Peace, and we got married. March 9th, just passed, was 59 years for us. We immediately had 2 little babies, 8 days less than a year apart. People would come up and go, you guys Catholic? I go, no, we're just horny Protestants. And it was time for me to go to Vietnam. She went back to Texas, these 2 little babies. And we were one of the first Marine jet squadrons into Vietnam, flying out of a place called Chu Lai, 50 miles south of Da Nang. And it was a very primitive place, nothing but sand and tents and sea rations and small cans that we ate out of. No air conditioning, no ice, except after combat missions when we got an ice cold drink. And it was very primitive. The runway was half of what we needed, and we operated off of that with jet assist takeoff bottles, and we recovered into carrier gear because we were all carrier qualified. And we flew superbly well. And I was with 28 of the finest men and pilots that will ever be my honor, privilege to be with in a life. It's a once in a lifetime experience. And I got to be with those men. I put in for a regular commission. And I knew when I filled out the paperwork, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because the regular commission guarantees a Marine officer a career in the Marine Corps. And they want their officers with regular commissions to have a college degree, or at least have significant college. And I had none. And these regular commissions are very competitive, and I got one. And I've looked back, I go, that's what I'm supposed to do. I expect that of me. Other people expect that of me. They do not expect me to go into a bar in Fargo, North Dakota and become the greatest pariah in all of commercial aviation history. No pilot before or since has ever done the damage that I did to an airline and to a profession. I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud of it, but I have to own it. And it is a fact. It's what I did. And it was the farthest thing on my mind from ever doing. I never wanted to do something like that. I got out of the Marine Corps after 11 and a half years because I was going to be gone from my family so much. And I wanted my family to be solid and stable and have a good foundation to it. It was a painful decision, and I finally made it and resigned. And 3 weeks later, I was in class at Northwest. And for nearly 22 years, I did the same thing at Northwest. My drinking is still going. It's going on and on and on. It's escalating. But then I'm drinking with other people just like me. And I don't see any problem with that. I just don't see any problem with that. Barbara had wanted a daughter. We had the 2 boys. When we got to Northwest, we decided to adopt. And we spent a hard time because we had 2 biological children. And we fought like hell. And we got this beautiful little Indian girl that came to live in our home when she was 17 days old. Barbara now had her daughter. I now had a daughter. And I found out what daughters do to their dads. She absolutely captured my heart. She became the center of my universe. Oh, I love my tough and rough and tumble boys. They were wonderful and great. But that little girl was so special. So special. And when she was 17, she ran away from home. I didn't see it coming. Barbara didn't see it coming. We just simply didn't see it coming. One of the reasons I didn't think I was an alcoholic was I didn't drink every night. I rarely ever drank in the mornings, 3 times a year, 4th of July, Memorial Day, and Labor Day. And I know all alcoholics drank in the mornings. I saw it on TV and in the movies. I didn't drink every weekend, but I deliberately varied my drinking patterns. Most normal drinkers don't feel compelled to do that. I devised a couple of tests along the way. A couple of times when I thought I might be having a problem, I devised a couple of tests based on zero data and factual knowledge. And of course, I passed the test. I get into treatment, they tell me most normal drinkers don't feel compelled to devise tests to see if they're a normal drinker. And I thought, well, who knew? The alcohol, I had put off being a captain for 2 years because I wanted to be home while Dawn finished up her high school and went to college. I was so happy, so pleased, and so proud that I could afford to send my kids to college. So I put off the test. I went, she's coming up on graduation. I went to Chicago to take a special written exam that would allow me to be a captain. The next morning I called home. She had run away that afternoon and left a note. And I was panicked. I didn't know where my little girl was. And I blurted out to Barbara where to go, who to call, and where to look. 2 hours later, I was home. I don't remember anything happening, but something clearly did. Because when I got off the airplane, all that panic and fear was gone. And in its place was white hot hatred. I hated that little girl, the little girl who had owned my heart. I absolutely hated her. And I told Barbara, I said, I don't care if she dies in the street. She'll never come back to my home. And I never want to hear her name for the rest of my life ever mentioned in front of me. I went to the bank and I ripped up her adoption papers. I'd gotten rid of all of her furniture to Goodwill. There was no physical trace she'd ever lived in my home. I went to an attorney and gave him $500 and disowned her. I tried to annul the adoption, couldn't, and in a way that's only insanely amusing. As I assessed the situation, I thought Barbara doesn't seem to be handling this too well. So she probably needs a therapist. So I got in the phone book, Yellow Pages, by the luck of the draw, pulled out this PhD doctor, family therapist. We saw him every day or twice a month for 2 years. Excuse me. I didn't like talking about my daughter. And one time I blurted out a sentence that I had never consciously formed that capsulized everything about me. And I looked at this doctor and said, I'm going to tell you something, doctor. I said, I would rather hate than hurt. And he said, you just survived a childhood doing it. If you continue, it'll destroy you. And he was right. I had learned early on that if I get angry, I don't feel pain. I don't feel pain if I get angry enough. And that's what I did. And Barbara suffered needlessly as a result of that. And she was the first one I had to make amends to. And I've never done some of the things that I did previous to that because I did not want to feel pain. I had a week to the day that I entered treatment. They announced on TV, the treatment center had 2 TV sets. They announced on TV that Northwest Airlines had terminated me. The FAA had issued an emergency revocation of all my flight certificates, and I lost my FAA medical because of my alcoholism. So I'm stripped of everything. I have no education to fall back on. Everything I have is gone. All I know how to do is fly airplanes, and that's gone. It's all gone. At that same time, I walked into a group therapy room. They closed the door, and there were 8 or 10 of us in there. And I no longer had that wall of anger in front of me. And I began counterintuitively. I have no idea why I even chose to speak, but I did. I started talking about my daughter, and I broke down and cried. I hadn't cried at my parents' funerals. I just didn't cry. And I sobbed that day because my heart was broken, and out came the feelings. And it was one of the greatest breakthroughs I ever made in treatment. Yeah, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I felt like I was sitting there naked, but it was a wonderful breakthrough. I got a hold of Barbara and I said, let's put this family back together again. There were no visitors, no phone calls to this treatment center. They said, we've heard about that and we will waive that and we will make it happen. We'll give you a day room if you can make it happen. And a week or so later, I came walking in a day room. The 2 doctors were there. They had asked if they could please come watch. I saw Barbara, saw my 2 sons. I saw my little girl for the first time in 2 years. And I thought, my gosh, she's smaller than I remembered. In her arms was a 5-month-old granddaughter. My daughter got married and I didn't even know her last name. I'd like to be able to describe to you what it felt like for me to walk across that room. She was very much aware of my feelings and put my arms around her and tell her how much I loved her and still how much I hated her. AA, the 12 steps, there was a recovery process that I was still brand new to, is starting to have an effect on me. It is starting to change the way I look at things. It is starting to change my belief system and my value system. And I could do that morning in treatment. I told my kids, you need to get geared up and ready to see me led away on TV in handcuffs. I'm now starting to undergo legal consequences. They're having to come tell me that because it's so serious outside. And I go through 6 of those, starting with Minnesota and a 90-day indictment and a misdemeanor connection. And then North Dakota gets, and it bounces back and forth, and the penalty stuff. And they keep coming and taking me out of group rooms. And every time they do it, it just stops my heart. It's like they suck the air out of the room. I can't breathe. I'd never been locked up before. I thought the only time I'd ever be locked up was as a Vietnam POW if I was shot down. But now they're talking about jail time. I can't do jail time. And yeah, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, they take me out, and there's a doctor standing there, and he takes me down to the office. My counselor's down there. He said, I have to tell you that a federal grand jury has just indicted you. You're looking at 15 years in federal prison, a $250,000 fine, and an attorney's coming in Sunday wants $50,000. I didn't have it. We went broke within 30 days. I'd grown up like that. Now I've taken Barbara with me. In my view, alcoholism, the tragedy of alcoholism is not what happens to the alcoholic. I deserve what I get. I'm a hardcore believer in when you do what you did, you get what you got, and being accountable. The tragedy is that Barbara didn't deserve this. My wife, my friends, and my kids and my family didn't deserve it. My friends didn't deserve it. And I bring this wide umbrella of suffering to them based on my alcoholism. It spreads all over them, and they get to share it as well. And I think that's the tragedy. I had many experiences in treatment, many life-changing experiences in treatment, because for the first time ever, I bought into this thing. I bought into the big book. I bought into the 12 and 12. I bought into all of these things that were taught to new AA people. I really didn't have much of a choice. I hope they were true. And the reason I do these talks is to tell whoever's listening, they are true. I have a distinct role to play in this. I have a part to play. I have obligations in this program and this fellowship. And if I fulfill mine, everything else is true. It's true when I leave treatment. It's true when I walk out of an AA meeting. and I've lived it. I know it. Second day in treatment, we went to an outside AA meeting. I'm sitting there. It was a week before anybody knew the color of my eyes because my head was down. I was so ashamed. I heard him read the promises, and I started to perk up a little bit. And then I heard him say, no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see our experience can benefit. I quit listening. I quit listening. I thought it'll be true for him. It may be true for her, but that will never, it can never possibly be true for me. It can't be. It just can't be, because I'm going too far down. I got out of treatment. I was very quickly in a 3-week public trial. There's so many stories I'd like to share with you. I don't, in the interest of time. You're hearing about maybe 30% of this whole story right now. And I had an interesting experience with a lawyer that no other defendant probably has ever had, but I haven't got time to go into it. I wanted to plead guilty, and he talked me out of it for reasons that made sense from a legal standpoint. They told me in treatment, you're going to have to learn to listen. You're going to have to learn to trust. And so I said, okay. But I said to Peter, I said, I will be found guilty. And when I am, I want you to know it will be okay. It will be okay. So we went through this trial. I'm lucky. I'm the only alcoholic in the group. And if we're not meeting at night for legal reasons, then I'm in an AA meeting. And at first it's scary because I'm all over television. And the minute I walk into an AA room, they know who I am. And so I sit, and I never share openly. I just sit. But there's a power among AA individuals in this room. It's in the air. And I breathe it in and I absorb it. And I take it to the courtroom the next day. And I get through that day. Criminal trials indescribable. They're talking about what a no good, worthless piece of crap I am, always have been, always will be, and I cannot respond. It's being picked up everywhere, broadcast everywhere, and people believe it. And once in a while, I'll look across the courtroom and Barbara will mouth the words, I love you. And I'll nod, and I'll be okay. The jury goes out, and the jury comes back. I know what that probably means. It's a quick verdict. This was a very quick process. This did not get drawn out over several years. I was arrested in March. I was in a federal trial in July and August. I was in sentencing in October, and I'm in prison in December. This thing went really, really fast. No long drawn out process for me. So I go back for the sentencing. Pardon me. I've been in treatment with a federal judge who said, you need to know some things. It's been corroborated and corroborated by other judges around the country. He said, when we come in for the sentencing, he said, that's a charade. He said, we already have the sentence set and we don't change from the bench. We researched it. We read the pre-sentencing investigation reports. You'll talk, your attorney will talk, maybe you'll have witnesses. He said, that part's a charade. And he said, we will never change from the Other judges have said that is so. A day and a half before sentencing, my attorney calls me. He says, I've got bad news. I thought you never called and said you had good news. He said, a day and a half, he said, the judge has just notified the other two attorneys and the media that he's going to depart upwards from the sentencing guidelines, which were 12 to 18 months. I knew I was going to get 18 months because I was the captain. He said, this judge has strong feelings. He can go all the way to 15 years and he can do it easily. So I told Barbara, I said, here's terror all the way to my bone marrow again. But I said, the fact is I'm powerless over what's going to happen. I have no power over what is about to happen. And it's a serenity prayer. I need to accept the things I cannot change. And this is one of them. So I'd given her all my personal effects when I walked into the sentencing that morning. I thought I'll never be coming back. The judge lectured about what he was getting ready to do and why. And then he said, when he got to me and I stood up to speak, all I could say, I didn't know what I was going to say. I was just scared. I talked about being grateful to be sober, grateful for what had happened in my family. I had made an excuse for this incident from day one, and I wasn't doing it now. I just had to accept what had happened. The judge announced a sentence on me of 16 months, 2 months less under the guidelines, which blew everyone in the courtroom away. Nobody could believe that sentence, including me. Some years later, about 1 or 2 years later, my attorney was in chambers. And he said, I was going to sentence Lyle to 4 years in prison that morning. He said, I changed from the bench. The one thing that never happens. I knew a miracle would happen. I didn't think I'd ever know what or why or how. Then he said, this is a complex case. It was not written for pilots. There'll be appeals. You men can stay, remain free until your appeals are exhausted. The other two said, okay. I said, no, I'll go in now. Why? Because I learned in here that I live life on life's terms. I knew I could stay out of prison for a year and a half. And I wanted to. But I knew every night when the sun went down, the imminent prospect of one day closer to the inevitable is going to play on my mind. And I remembered somewhere in high school English, a saying that said, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man only one. And I am not going to die 1,000 deaths until it's finally time. I'm going now. And I told my kids, I said, I can't come out the back door till I go in the front. And I was scared of that. I've never been in a penitentiary. But I also remembered what I learned in the Marine Corps, that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the ability to continue in the face of it, and that's now my job. So on December the 5th of 1990, 34 years to the day that I went into Marine Corps boot camp, I entered the Atlanta Federal Prison System as inmate 04478-041. I don't talk about prison experiences in there. I had a lot of them. Audiences love those stories. They have nothing to do with my recovery. But I took 12 steps into that prison system with me, and I came out whole and intact, not because I'm a tough Marine, but because I'm a member of AA, and I've got 12 steps, and I know how to apply each one of those to any particular part of life that is required at that moment in time. And that's exactly what I did, and that's exactly how I did it. Inmates would come up to me and say, how can you do what you're doing here? And I knew they couldn't understand because they weren't a product of AA or the 12 steps. The judge put sanctions on me on top of everything else to make sure I never flew again. I was the most notorious pariah in all of aviation. I've told you that. My situation was such a horrific betrayal of the public trust that he put every measure in place to make sure that I never, ever saw the inside of an airplane again, not a cockpit. A year after I got out of prison, another story I don't have time for, he lifted those sanctions. Not one chance in 10,000 he would do that, but he did. The FAA then said, if you want to fly again, you start with a private license, literally from the ground up. None of my pilot buddies thought it was possible. And I didn't for a moment or two, but I thought I do everything in here one day at a time. I'll do this one license at a time. 10 and a half months later, I'd pass the writtens on all 4. That's a short version of a long, hard trek. Tremendous amount of work. But there's a flying part that goes with each one of those licenses. I'm back working in the treatment center that has saved my life. I'm working in the counseling department. I'm making $14,000 a year. I do not know how Barbara and I lived on that. She was making $6 an hour working in an office supply place. I don't know. And part of my job is taking urine specimens from patients. That's a long way down from the prestige and the glamour and the position of being a 4-stripe airline captain, ex-Marine fighter pilot. I'm taking urine specimens. Let me tell you something. My attitude always was, I'm going to bag these and tag them better than they've ever been done before. I was grateful for that job. I was grateful for the opportunity to do anything that I could to just simply stay alive. I was grateful for that. So my attitude was intact. But I can't do the flying, not if it's going to cost 10 or 15,000 bucks. About that time, a pilot from Northwest gets a hold of me. He said, you didn't know it, but I've got a flight school. 50 miles northwest of the Twin Cities in Buffalo, Minnesota. I want you to come up here and live with me and my family and go through here for free, do all the flying for free, and get your tickets back. So I went up there. I'm under 13 conditions of probation, checked into the Minnesota Department of Corrections, and I spent 44 days with that man. Rained out 14 days. I never slowed down, never quit studying, never let up. I flew 78 hours in 30 days, which is a lot of flying in a little airplane, a lot of flying. And I got 4 licenses back. I had 2 of them by 11:15 one morning, and I don't think that's ever been done before. But the thing I don't like about this first person story is about I, me, I, me. It was never about I or me. It's about us, you and me, and these 12 steps that hold us all together, that I take, I embrace, and I use. It's about us. That's what this story is about. The best part of my story is that I don't get any credit for it. All I did was what you asked me to do, and what we ask every new person coming into A to do. Get a sponsor, get a home group, do 90 and 90 worth of steps with a sponsor, then try to do some service work. That's all I ever did. And these are the things that came as a result. I came back with those licenses in my hand, and I told Barbara, I said, I don't think I'll ever fly on American soil because my name is too well known. And the Northwest Flight 650 incident is emblazoned in everybody's headlines, along with alcoholic and felon, all of that. A month later, the licenses came in the mail, and I got a phone call from the head of the pilot unit at Northwest. And a grievance had been filed. I had not activated it, nor was I going to, because they were justified in terminating me. And I knew it, and I was going to leave it alone. He said, the best phone call I've ever made, because he said 3 hours ago, John Dasberg, President and CEO of Northwest Airlines, whom I'd never even seen, made a decision to bring him back and pitch in full flight status at Northwest. I had tears streaming down my cheeks. I could not believe that words coming through the phone, nor could I believe that this was actually happening. If a pilot's airline is mentioned publicly one time, they're done. My airline had been mentioned egregiously dozens of times, and he's going to bring me back and let me fly again. I got a phone call in June of '96 from Jay Leno telling me he apologized for all the monologues that I provided him as a result of my incident. Another story I don't have time for. He's going to bring me back and let me fly, in the face of anticipated much public backlash. That didn't come except from Jay Leno. I got articles sent from all over the country, from editorials, and all but a couple of them were supportive, which surprised me. Add to that the fact, and I thought to myself, that his decision beyond the level of extraordinary courage. And I thought, does he know that 7 out of 10 alcoholics relapse? And if I go back and relapse, the board of directors will oust him so fast he can't pack his desk. Why would he dare take a chance? He's gambling his career on mine, effectively. And I talked to him about that. Never got a really good answer. But I went back on November 3rd, 1993, and signed a back to work agreement, never to be a captain again. Northwest now had a program for pilots. I'm part of it. All I have to do is stay sober one day at a time. All I have to do is do the things I'm supposed to do one day at a time, realizing that I can't stay sober today on what I did yesterday. So I must continue to move forward, always in the progress of this fellowship and this recovery journey that we're all on. That's all I've done. As I'm coming up on my last year at Northwest, speaking of United Airlines, I get a call late at night. Pilot telling me, John Dasberg has just changed your back to work agreement. You were never to be a captain again, but he knows you're coming up on your last year, and he thinks you should be a 747 captain. So I went back and checked out as a 747 captain, taking this thing full circle. That's what I wanted to do, but I would never ask for it. So now I retire with a reputation that's even better than I ever had before. I've got a picture of a 747 over here on the wall. It's got to be at least 2,000, 3,000 signatures of pilots and flight attendants wishing me well. I prize that. I prize that very much. So I retired on September 29th of 1968. My 60th birthday. It's now 65. And within a day or two, I get a phone call from my attorney. He said, I don't know if you knew, but Judge Rosenbaum is now chief judge of the Minnesota Federal District. I said, no, I didn't know. He says, apparently he's followed you for 8 years, because he's telling me that he's never supported a petition for pardon in 16 years, but he'll support yours if you want to make the attempt. Over here in my safe is the 3-page affidavit that he wrote on me that I cannot read all the way to page 3 without getting tears in my eyes. Words written by the man who sent me to prison. That document went in along with a lot of other paperwork. 2 years later, I get a notice that I've just received a presidential pardon from Bill Clinton. I remember that night. my second day in treatment. No matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see our experience can benefit others. And I thought, no, not possible. And you have only heard about 30% of the entire story right now tonight. And I want to bring this to a close real quick, like, and I like to close this way because it's fitting, I think. And it's simply this: I do not wish you joys without a sorrow, nor endless day without the healing dark, nor brilliant sun without the restful shadow, nor tides that never turn against your bark. I wish you strength and faith and love and wisdom and goods, gold enough to help some needy one. I wish you songs, but also blessed silence and God's sweet peace when every day is done. My Comanche name is Lyle, but you know me as, my Comanche name is Yestatanap, but you know me as Lyle. And I want to thank you for the evening that we've shared together. And there's part of the story I didn't go into with regard to my wife. I'll leave that for another time. But thank you for an evening of sobriety, and thank you for my sobriety. That's all I've got. Thank you.